I have one of those voices that usually unfortunately they can hear me very far away, which has gotten me in trouble over the course of my life. Well, thanks for coming out here. Some of you may know that this book is very dear to me. When I wrote it as a hardcover, I really thought that I had sort of written the book that I wanted to write, and you know, when paperback came around, it would just be the paperback version of the hardback book, and that would pretty much be it. For those of you who don't know the basic premise of the story, this sort of started 8 years ago when I went back to this little town where I grew up in New Jersey when I was a kid, and I gave a little talk about, I think it was about Tuesdays with Morrie back then, and after the talk was over, this rabbi, who I had known my whole life, and was really the only clergyman I'd ever had in my life, he was 82 years old. He came up to me in the hallway after this talk, and he said, "Hey, I'd like to ask you a favor." I said, "Okay, you've never asked me a favor before, but go ahead." And he said, "Would you do my eulogy when I die?" And, you know, it really threw me because I wasn't very religious, certainly at the time, and who was I to do a eulogy, you know, for the guy who does eulogies? You know, that's what he gets paid for. And I thought they, you know, have it work it out with, you know, didn't rabbis and priests and pastors all talk to one another ahead of time? You know, like if I go first, you'll do me, and if you go first, you'll do me. So all of a sudden he was asking me, and I said, well, you know, I don't really know how to do this, but if you want me to do it, I need to get to know you, you know, as a human being. I need to see who you are away from, you know, just the pulpit and all that. And so I began to go visit him, and I thought, you know, maybe I'd visit with him for a couple months, because usually when somebody asks you for eulogy, there's a reason, you know. But it actually lasted 8 years. He lived another 8 years till he was 90 years old. And over the course of all those visits, you know, I really became very enamored with faith and what it did for him, and I watched his life and how content he was with his life and all the things, and I sort of got back into it. You know, I had been very into it as a kid, and then it kind of walked away from it. And some of you know I do work with the homeless here in Detroit, and along the way, while this was all going on, I happened into this church downtown in Detroit called I My Brother's Keeper Ministries, which was taking care of homeless people by letting them sleep on the floor and ministering to them. Unfortunately, the church had this giant hole in its roof where rain and snow and everything would literally fall in on the congregants, and they didn't have any money to fix it. It was always freezing cold in there. And the pastor of this church, who I became friendly with, was a man named Henry Covington, who was the polar opposite of this rabbi. He was a drug dealer when he was younger, and a thief, and he was incarcerated, you name it. Like he said, I broke every one of the 10 Commandments. And then one night when he thought he was going to be murdered by drug dealers, he was on the ground with a shotgun, and he was waiting for the end, and they wait for them to kill him and his whole family, and he kind of did one of those deals with God, you know, where he looked up and he said, "Jesus, if you get me out of this, you know, tonight, I'm yours tomorrow. Just, here's the deal, you know, just tonight you, tomorrow me." And he got out of it. I mean, they didn't come. I don't know why. And nobody came down the street, no bullets were fired, and the next morning he actually kept his promise. And he began this sort of walk back to getting good again. And 20 years later, here he was in Detroit running this church for no money and taking care of the poor, feeding hungry people in the community, driving around with a car with food on the hood and everything. And so he and I became friendly, and the book ends up chronicling these two different stories of me going and visiting this guy in New Jersey who's old and, you know, from the suburbs and white and Jewish, and then here in Detroit with this African American who's Christian and inner city, and they couldn't be more opposite, and yet they were really very much alike, I found, because, you know, when your life is guided by faith and a belief in God and things like that, you actually have more in common than you think you have with other people who do the same. And my message was sort of, you know, isn't that what faith really should be? In the end, we shouldn't keep looking at one another and saying, you know, you're different, so I'm better than you, my faith's better than yours. We should try to say, well, what do we all have in common? So I wrote the book, and the book came out, and it was very well received, and thankfully a lot of people who read it began to send money into the church, and they eventually had enough money to fix their roof, which they did, and it was on TV and everything, and it was a really beautiful story, and it's finally warm inside, and it's not, snow isn't coming down, and Pastor Covington was getting a lot of attention. And then last Christmas, just a couple months ago, just before Christmas, Henry and I flew into New York to do the Today Show. And it was the 1-year anniversary of fixing the roof, and they did a real nice program on it, and they all loved him, and they made a huge fuss over him, and they were kissing him and hugging him and congratulating him, and he'd never been on a show like that. It was such a big deal to him, and we came outside. It was a nice, crisp sunny, wintry day, and we walked around Rockefeller Center a little bit. He said, wow, New York has really gotten nice, because he hadn't really been there since he left, you know, all his bad ways behind. And he said, we were going to the airport. He said, you think I could stay like another night? Is it possible to stay another night? I'd love to see my family and friends, people I haven't seen here in years. And I said, sure, you know, we just change your plane tickets, no big deal. And so we changed his plane ticket. I went home. We hugged at the airport. I told him I would see him on Thursday night. We were going to have our regular little meeting. And his family picked him up. He went and saw all his relatives that he hadn't seen in years, had a wonderful time. And here he was coming home like a hero. You know, he was on the Today Show, and there was a book about him, you know. And they took him back to his hotel about 3 in the morning or whatever, dropped him off, and they said they'd pick him up a little later in the day and take him to the airport to come back to Detroit. And when his brother came to come pick him up, he didn't answer the phone in his room, and he didn't answer the knock on the door, and eventually they had to get the police, and they busted in the door, and he had died in his sleep. You know, just a massive heart attack, apparently, and he was a very, very big man, 430 pounds or so, and he wasn't in great health, and everybody had always told him, you gotta lose weight, and you know, it just kind of caught up with him. And the paperback was already scheduled to come out. In fact, they were already printing it. And I called and they said, we have to stop. I mean, this changes the whole story here. I need to say something about this man, and he's not with us anymore. And I ended up doing a eulogy at his funeral, too. So what started as a story of one eulogy ended up becoming two. You know, I never thought I'd do one in my life. I ended up doing two within 2 years. And so I included that in a new chapter that's at the end of this book, and it's so new and it was so last minute that they don't even have it on the front, you know, where it says new material, because they didn't have time to reprint the cover, but they did get the chapter in. So if any of you have actually read the book before, there's new material, and it talks about the whole experience of fixing the roof and Henry and our friendship, and then what happened at the end, and the eulogy that I gave for him is in the book as well. So that's why this is sort of a special edition of a paperback, and so I'll be happy to sign it for you, or for your friends or family or gifts or anything like that. And if you think of somebody that you forgot about when you're up here, you don't have to go to the back of the line. This isn't punishment. We trust you. It's Rochester Hills, you know, where you're going to go. Also, pick up one of these too, just to remind you about our play that opens on April 28th. So you take one of these with you, about Ernie Harwell, a play called Ernie, which Ernie had asked me before he died. Boy, everybody I know is dying. Ernie had asked me before he died if I would consider doing a play or a movie about his life, and I really didn't think there was much of a movie, because movies you have to blow things up, you know, and explode. That wasn't who Ernie was, but I thought, wow, a play would be interesting, and we started, and then he got too sick, and we had to stop. But after he died, I kind of picked up the idea a little bit and said, well, maybe we could do this as a tribute to him. And the Tigers have been great, and it's all come together wonderfully, and it's at the City Theater in Detroit, which is right across from Comerica Park, and it's right behind Hockey Town Cafe. It's what used to be the old Second City Theater, and it's a beautiful, intimate little 400-seat theater, and the show is coming along tremendously. We got two wonderful actors right from here in Michigan. They have all kinds of footage from the history of baseball, from Ty Cobb all the way through Willie Mays, and all the people that Ernie knew, Jackie Robinson, the '68 Tigers, the '84 Tigers, all that stuff. So it's really going to be a fun show, and it opens on April 28th. And it runs, it's Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sundays through the end of June. So if you'd like to see, we kept all the tickets really cheap, you know, made the whole thing a family-friendly thing. So most of the tickets are $20. There's a few seats are $25, and that's it. So there's nothing more than that. It's not one of those $80, $90 shows where you can't afford to take your kids or anything. And you even get discount off the Tiger ticket if you go to the game. We set some shows that you can actually see the show and then make the game, because it's a pretty short show. And you get $5 off every ticket from the Tigers if you do that too. So we're trying to make it a friendly experience. So it's all there on the thing. This is my dear friend Rosie, and a producer of our radio show. And for those of you who follow, I guess a hand. He'll be talking about this tomorrow. He got applause. Okay, yeah, that's never happened. So say hi to him. Kenny charges for his appearance. So yes, we can't bring Kenny here. But actually, you know what? I just remembered this, Rosie.
Picture?
Yes, and I'm going to tease Kenny with this, because I'm going to take your picture. Everybody always brings cameras, so today I am going to take yours, and I'm going to tease Kenny. And you can all hold your hands up and say, "Where's Kenny?" And yes, this will really make him totally embarrassed. So let's see. How can I get? Okay. Wait. I'll shoot through the crowd here. Ah, yes.
Yes.
Stand up in a chair. Very good.
That'll give a good aerial.
Even better. You didn't know you were all going to be on camera here when this day started.
So on the count of 3, we'll all yell.
Yes. Now all of you kind of turn towards me and throw your hands up and say, "Where's Kenny?" Oh yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's going on the web. Oh, good. Oh. Oh, that's perfect.
Any other housekeeping we need to do before you...
No, I think I have house kept everything. So as soon as I put this up on the internet... Yes, this is the way it works,
going
isn't
up
it?
right now.
It only takes 1 second to be worldwide. You just thought you were going to be... Okay.
Tell him we're mad at him. He chooses to go to Northville. Yeah.
He says he's going to Northville.
Yeah, if he
We'll
shows
see.
up.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. There you go.
Maybe he has to do
They
something with
all
his kids.
ask, "Where's Kenny?"
He has to do something with his kids.
You're being way too nice.
I did see him at Angel's place when we all worked out there years ago. He showed up for that working.
Yeah, he actually does help on the volunteer stuff.
That's good. That's good.
Okay. And we're launched. That's all there is to it in today's world. All right. So, come on up.
You got it.